Welcome everyone to The Matrix, Conversations and Transformations, a webinar series from the Department of Critical Theory and Social Justice. I'm Professor Mary Christianakis, and I'm joined by my co-organizers of the series, Professor Heldman, the chair of the department, and Professor Malik Moazzam Dolat, Professor Mora, who is also co-hosting with me. This series focuses on pressing current events and seeks to connect our community with experts, scholars, artists, and the most effective activists. This fall semester, in collaboration with the California Immigration Semester, we are hosting a series focused on immigration and the election. You can register for upcoming events and access our YouTube channel where you can watch video of past events at oxy.edu/matrix. We're also on Instagram and Twitter at CTSJ Oxy for both. Just a heads up, next week as part of our Black Women in Hollywood series, October 21st at noon, that's a Wednesday, that's not our usual time. We'll be hosting Christine Swanson, Hollywood film director and screenwriter of blockbuster films like All About Us, All About You, For the Love of Ruth, and many others. And without further ado, we're so excited. Professor Mora will be introducing our esteemed speaker for today, Alice Bag.
Hi, everyone. Alice Bag is a singer-songwriter, musician, author, artist, educator, and feminist. Alice was the lead singer and co-founder of The Bags, one of the first bands to form during the initial wave of punk in Los Angeles. The Alice Bag Band was featured in the seminal documentary on punk rock, The Decline of Western Civilization. Alice went on to perform in other groundbreaking bands, including Castration Squad, Cholita, and Las Tres. She is the author of the critically acclaimed book, Violence Girl and Pipe Bomb for the Soul. Her self-titled 2016 debut album received critical acclaim and was named one of the best albums of 2016 by AllMusic. Her second album, Blueprint, was named one of the best albums of 2018 by NPR and the Los Angeles Times. Bag's third album, Sister Dynamite, was released this past April. So now we'll get to speak with Alice Bag herself. Hello, Alice.
Hi, Professor Mora. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. So,
welcome.
Thank you.
Would you like to start us off sharing your presentation, or do you want us to get into?
Yeah, I can tell you. Well, I mean, I always feel like I get more comfortable once I tell people a little bit about myself, so they know
Sounds
where
good.
I'm coming from and why I have the opinions that I have. So I'll start off by showing you my little slideshow. I was born and raised in East LA. I chose this picture of my father because he looks kind of mean. And while my father had like some super great qualities, he also could be a tyrant. And when he was a tyrant, he would beat up my mother, terrorize the household, and really impacted my life with the way that I saw him dominate our household. The role of women in my home was defined by abuse and domination. And I think it became like the reason that I became a feminist. Every time I saw like a woman stand up to my father, I felt like a huge sense of power. I felt like I want to do that. I want to like stand up to the patriarchy someday. And, you know, as a little kid, the patriarch in my house was the patriarchy at large in future years, right? So another thing you need to know about me, aside from the fact that I grew up in an abusive household and that shaped my ideas of wanting to be a feminist, is that I started school only speaking Spanish. So unfortunately, I'm not a tech wizard, so I can't see what's coming up in my, in my slideshow, but I started school only speaking Spanish, and that experience also really affected me because I felt like I immediately was othered. You know, I immediately felt like I didn't fit in. I couldn't communicate with my teachers. I was made to feel like it was wrong to speak my own language. And that was really damaging. And at a certain point, I think I just gave up. Like, my name is Alicia. It was Alicia Armendariz. And at a certain point, my teachers couldn't pronounce it. So they just started calling me Alice, which is a name that I stuck with. You know, I'm like, okay, they're not going to mispronounce my name. I'm just going to go by Alice from now on. And I kept it, and I still use both Alice and Alicia interchangeably, depending on who is saying my name. I don't like to be called Alicia Velasquez, so I would rather you call me Alice Bag if that's, you know, if that's your the level of your pronunciation. That's fine with me. I am that person too. And if you can manage Alicia Velasquez or Alicia Armendariz, that is who I am too. So that experience shaped how I saw myself, but not really as much as this experience. This is a picture of the Chicano Moratorium, which happened in August of 1970. I was 11 years old when I went to this with my family. And it was the first time that I had conceived of myself as like being part of a group, and being part of a group that was powerful and could like create this kind of excitement, this movement, and also to see that this group had people who opposed it so dramatically that they would attack. The Chicano Moratorium ended with violence when the police tried to shut it down. It started off as a peaceful demonstration against the Vietnam War in general, but specifically against the number of Chicano soldiers that were being drafted and sent to the war and sent to like particularly dangerous places. The casualty rate was higher among Chicano soldiers. So the Chicano community had organized to do this peaceful march, and is often the case, as is often the case with demonstrations organized by people of color, it was shut down with extreme violence. And it ended in, I think it was 3 deaths, a lot of injuries, you know, a lot of people being just canistered with gas. And one notable person that was killed at this demonstration was Ruben Salazar. So, but I have to mention again that I was 11 years old when this happened. And although it made me realize who I was as a Chicana, and again, you know, as an outsider in American culture, in mainstream American culture, it also gave me a point of pride. At the time though, I was also discovering who I was. I was 11 years old, just getting ready to start puberty or just, you know, starting puberty and starting to have strange feelings that I didn't understand. I would later realize that I was bisexual, but I didn't, at that time, I was getting really negative messages about what it was like to have any kind of homosexual feelings. So I had to figure out what was happening to me, whether I had control of it, and how I fit in as a Chicana. And, you know, growing up as a Catholic in my family, it was really a difficult thing to navigate. The good thing is that when I entered middle school, I discovered David Bowie. And David Bowie presented himself as this sort of androgynous extraterrestrial. He had a character called Ziggy Stardust that was from outer space and didn't have to, I mean, somebody from outer space doesn't have to adhere to any of the restrictions of our social norms, or, you know, they're who they are. They're different already, and they accept their difference, and there's no way they can hide it. And that was liberating for me to imagine somebody like that, somebody who didn't have to try to fit in, because no matter what they did, They would never fit in. And discovering that I was also that extraterrestrial that would never really fit in was a lifelong process, but these were the first seeds of it. I felt like I kind of lived a double life, because even though in middle school I was really into glam and things like David Bowie and Elton John, and really theatrical performers that were gender bending and pushing the envelope as to what an artist was. It wasn't just like the straightforward rock and rollers with either long hair or, or really dressed up or in suits. These were people that were very flamboyant. At the same time, there was this pressure to fit into school. And I remember having my sister say, like, you should try out for the cheerleading squad. I did, and I made it, only to discover that what I thought a cheerleader was, which was, kind of an athlete that would get out and do this like precision routine, and would be treated with respect because, you work really hard and you have to be athletic and you have to do like cartwheels and back bends and support other people with your body. But none of that was valued. At a certain point, I remember being at cheerleading practice and having another cheerleader tell me, don't work so hard, Alice. We're just here to make the guys feel good. We're here to bolster them so that they can win the game. And that was really eye-opening for me because I didn't see myself that way. I didn't see myself as someone that was just there to bolster the guy. And I quit cheerleading. Another inspiration for me at that time was the groupie culture. I told you that I got really into glam, but I'm kind of obsessive compulsive a little bit. And I got really involved in like researching all the bands that I was into at that time. So I would get all the rock magazines, read them from cover to cover, and memorize, little facts, little trivia about all my favorite artists. And every now and then I would see an article about women in rock, but the women that were being written about in rock were the groupies. It wasn't the musicians. You might get like a little quarter of a page that mentioned Susie Quattro or Fanny, but by and large, the women that got like the attention were women who were sexualized and who were there to do the same thing that the cheerleaders did. It was just to bolster the ego of the musician so that he could go out there and do a good job. So I had these two influences in my life during middle school, and I thought, like, these women are really cool. Look at them. God, they look glamorous. They must have these incredible lives. And it dawned on me that I wasn't cut out for it. I decided that I didn't want to be a cheerleader. I didn't want to be a groupie. I went to a show in high school. I think it was 1975. And I saw Patti Smith in concert. And to see Patti Smith in concert was eye-opening again because she was not the typical singer, female singer that I'd seen in the past. Like the women that I admired that would perform music live would be groomed. They would wear tight sequin dresses and their hair was up to here and their makeup was impeccable and they looked beautiful and glamorous and their moves were choreographed. And then you had Patti Smith come out and she was pure raw energy and sexuality, but she never looked like she had, gone to a hairdresser or had her makeup done and nobody was going to groom her. She looked a little bit dirty, but when she started talking, you immediately connected to her because she connected to you with her intelligence, with her energy. And when she performed, she had that same thing that the guy rockers did, which was animal magnetism, you know, that you can't groom. And the more you groom it, the more you actually cover it up. So this was a revelation for me. Patti Smith really changed the way I saw performance. And because I could never see myself being like, you know, perfectly groomed and, you know, like the kind of choreographed performer, I started to think, you know, maybe I could be a performer too. Now, one thing I didn't tell you about myself was that when I was in elementary school, I had a music teacher who got me my first job, and that was singing for educational cartoons. So I had tucked it in the back of my head, like maybe someday I can be a singer. But from that to this, you know, it took a few years to realize it. I found inspiration in some of my other heroes too. And here you see Bessie Smith, who was one of my earliest loves and is still like someone that, you know, people ask me about like my End of the World or Desert Island record collection. It always has to include Bessie Smith because she was someone who I feel played by her own rules. And she had that same thing where it was like sexual magnetism that was not based on like her fitting a model. She was herself. She was also bisexual and also like just free with her speech and free with her expression, which was very inspiring to me. The group on the right of Bessie is Fanny, and they were an early rock group. They were the first like all-female rock group to have their own full-length album on a major label. And they were inspirational to me because I like the idea of working with all women. And I like the message of empowerment. I like the idea of not having to ask a guy for help. The group Fanny did not get as much attention as they should have. They never got a lot of publicity. They never got a lot of recognition. They're very talented musicians. And if you have a chance, maybe you can look them up on YouTube. Some of the women in Fanny have reformed in a group called Fanny Walk the Earth, and they released a record recently. So I would look for that too. And it also is important to mention that in this particular photograph, there's two women of color, and that is June Millington, who's at the front, and Jean, her sister. And they are Filipinas. And that is really cool too, to be able to see somebody who is not only not groomed to be a pop star, but also a person of color, you know? These are people that make me feel like I can do it too. Down at the bottom corner, you see Susie Quattro, who during my middle school days and my high school days, this was somebody that I would see rocking out. And she was like, she had that Elvis Presley swagger, you know, she'd wear like these all leather jumpsuits. She also was in a band with her sister, Patti Quattro, and the band was called the Pleasure Seekers, and you see their album down below. I would also recommend that you look up you look up all these artists because they all have videos online and they all have music on Spotify. So they are some of the women who inspired me to form my own band. And here we are, my band. We finally get to the point where I'm making music. My friend Patricia, who's very back, all in black, she had this brilliant idea to put paper bags over our heads. We had tried forming an all-girl band for about a year in 1976. I think it was our senior year in school. we'd tried forming a band, and we'd had a very limited success. We did find a few female musicians and we did form bands, but they never quite took off. And one day she said to me, let's just form this band. I have this great idea. I went out with a group of friends and we put paper bags over our heads and we drove around Whittier and we'd roll down our windows and get close to passengers and try to talk to them. And it was just a wonderful night of like scaring passersby or engaging them in conversation or making them laugh. So this is what like bored youth did in Whittier in the 70s. Like we drove around with paper bags over our heads. Not me, but Patricia. And she proposed that as an idea for us as the band to play with paper bags over our heads. And we thought it was a great idea. I thought it was a great idea. And our friend Janet, who is in purple there, also wanted to be a part of it. But it was still bass, guitar, and vocals at that point. Patricia played bass, Janet played guitar, and I sang. I tried to play guitar, but they wouldn't let me. They wanted me to sing. So we put an ad in the paper, the Recycler, which was like the Craigslist of our time, and we were trying to recruit female musicians. But these quirky guys answered. In the Kitty Spit Up t-shirt is Geza X, who insinuated himself into the band and played guitar with us. And Joe Nannini at the front, he is very scantily clad with a little doll in a jockstrap. That is a doll. And so this became the first version of the bags. And here we are just walking down Hollywood Boulevard, and my boyfriend was snapping pictures of us. We did, by the way, a couple of the guys went into the police station in those outfits and were escorted out very quickly. So being in a punk band changed me. It changed me permanently. It changed me for several reasons. One was that I finally felt like I had the freedom to speak out. When I was a little kid and my mother was being beaten, I often felt like my voice wasn't heard. I felt like physically I could just be removed. But with punk, I was front and center. I was screaming whatever I had to scream, not singing, even though I thought I was going to be singing. I actually ended up screaming most of the stuff. And I had an audience who was interested in connecting with me. I don't know if they heard every word I said, but I know they felt everything I was putting out. And that was important to me because I felt the connection with my audience. I felt like we were together in the show, in the moment. And then because this particular punk scene was an actual scene, was an actual community, it didn't stop with the show. It actually went on. A lot of us lived in the same apartment building. We'd see each other every day. It wasn't like we just went out to a show and saw, some people that we vaguely knew. We lived we lived with these people. We shared breakfast, lunch, and dinner. A lot of times we'd go to each other's apartments and, just hang out, see what the other person was doing. If one of my friends was playing, a group of us might make flyers and go out all together to put them on cars or to paste them or to just hand them to strangers. So that made me aware of the power of our community. And it was something that stayed with me. And this is kind of the end of my presentation because I just wanted to give you a little bit of my history in punk and where it came from, where my feminism came from, where my feeling that I could shape my own, my surroundings and my community. This is where it all came from. So I'm going to stop the share. And, oh, good. Now I can see you. Well, I can see some of you.
Thank you.
So
So Alice,
I'm
can you
hoping
talk
that
a little bit about,
yeah.
can you talk a little bit about, so I grew up in that time, and can you talk a little bit about punk as sort of a youth movement and what it meant to other youth? And there was something about punk that provided a space for people who had been maybe marginalized or disenfranchised from like dominant hegemonic sort of youth behavior, right? Or youth cultures or.
Yeah, I think what happened is that because punk was not really, like, I think a lot of times people describe punk as a music genre, and I don't think it's that at all. I think it is a movement, and it was created by people who didn't fit in their own backyard. Like for me, like the queerness was something that was unusual, and my weirdness, you know, like I'm a creative person, so I dressed and acted in ways that didn't fit in with people in my high school or my junior high. So, so I already felt like an outsider from a very young age. So when I got to punk, I found that that was something that was valued. It was the quirkier you were, the more accepted you were, because what punk sought to do was to give voice to something original and new, and the things that were original or new were the things that had been suppressed in the past. The people that hadn't had a voice in the past were the ones that had the original messages. So I always feel like punk was created by women and queers and people of color, because that was the first time that we had to not fit a mold. The less you fit the mold, the better. In fact, people who tried to join the punk scene and were coming from a background where they were like maybe highly skilled musicians that came in and thought like, well, I'm going to show you how it's done. They were ostracized. Nobody wanted somebody to come in to our scene and act like they knew more than us, or that they like were going to impose some kind of rules as to how we should play or how we should look or how we should behave. So I found punk very, very inclusive, and that's what made the scene strong, and that's what made it grow.
Alicia, your presentation, the title, right?
Punkera.
Yeah, vida, right? So sort of punk rocker for life.
Yeah, Punkera, and also I think it's interesting because I think, you know, when I think of Punkera, I think like Punkera is like era in Spanish sometimes means like I was, right? Like it's in the past. So I always think like Punkera, punk soy, you know, like,
Yeah.
yes, por vida.
So I wanted to ask you about that, right? Because especially because you said it's a movement. You know, I'm really fascinated by the fact that, I mean, this is a way of life for you, and it has been, right? And was there a particular moment where you sort of had that revelation that this was going to be forever, or was it just?
Well, I think it's not necessarily, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, or was it just such a part of your dailiness that it just one day went into the next and you're still punk?
Yeah, I think of punk, as I said, not necessarily, I haven't always like, by man, I could probably not tell right now. I have a little bit of purple in my hair, but like, I haven't always dressed the part. You know, there were times when I was teaching elementary school. I was an elementary school teacher for over 20 years, and I would wear a costume. I would dress like what I thought a teacher should look like. And, you know, in hindsight now, I think maybe I shouldn't have done that. But at the time I felt like, I don't want to scare the parents. If there's a, you know, maybe like once I'd been teaching for a while at a school, I might've put a little bit of pink in my hair, or a little, you know, I eased them into my weird appearance. But my teaching and my ideology and my creative output were always punk, you know? So I think if people think like she's always like, you know, like ever since that point, she wore since the 70s, she's been wearing leather jackets and having crazy hair. That's not true. But the punk has always been inside of me. And in fact, when I connect to other people who were around at the same time that I was, other punks, either in LA or across the country, I always hear that like punk shaped us. It really taught us the important things, which are that we can question authority, that we don't need to have skills that are determined by somebody else to create change. You can take control of of whatever tools you need, and you can disseminate your own information, and you can create communities that will propel change. So those are the things that I think are punk and stick with you for the rest of your life.
So it's just that particular ethos?
Yeah.
Alice,
Sorry.
I remember the 70s and the 80s. There was a particular like beautiful aesthetic, like informed by like Charlie's Angels or something like that, right? Dukes of Hazzard, those kinds of very white, hegemonic, model-looking people, which was sort of disorganizing for those of us who were immigrants or people of color who were ethnic, right? And I remember when I was in middle school and I discovered punk for myself, right? That I was like, oh my God, I can dye my hair, and it was a fashion and beauty revolution, and a sort of an attack on beauty. And I was wondering if you could talk to like the style and what that did during that time. And like I remember having blue hair and black hair and angled down, and I just felt, oh my God, this is like we're breaking into something that's new and exciting and ours. And
yeah, I mean, I think it's always like it's empowering to know that you don't have to be the kind of beautiful that it's being marketed to you, right? That you can create, you can define beauty in your own terms, and it could be crazy hair. I mean, I think punk, in the very early days, when like in the mid 70s, well, people would see us and they'd think like, these people are crazy, and nobody would have thought, nobody that wasn't a punk rocker would have been attracted to me, which was kind of cool because I wouldn't be attracted to them either. So I wasn't trying to go for like, I'm trying to, attract a mate. I just felt like I'm expressing what I think is cool, what I think is beautiful, and you take it or leave it, which is, that's tremendously empowering. I feel like I still, like, that's another way in which punk still informs my life, like it's a lot easier to dye your hair when it's, half gray because you don't have as much bleaching to do. But yeah, it's, I mean, the thing that I noticed too is that like punk women in particular, we didn't go for that like wide-eyed, cute, vulnerable, like little girl look. It was like, I connected it, like my particular makeup, I connected it much more to like a chola look, with like the heavy eyeliner, with like lion or tiger eyes that, were like sharp angles, that said power, that said like, come near me, but you're going to have to like hold your own because I am someone who holds power. Whereas I think a lot of times what's shown as attractive to young women is like be really, really thin and frail, wear really high heels that you can barely walk in, and like just, get some implants and like further throw your body off center. I mean, it's like the amount of negative messages that come from like trying to fit a mold is I mean, I know we all know how detrimental it is, but I feel like punk really confronted that because, you know, we dressed in like clothes that we either made ourselves. A lot of times, like I remember spray painting clothes, like taking clothes from the thrift store that we'd buy. Some places sold them by the bag. You know, you would get a bag full of clothes and they'd weigh them, and then you'd pay like a couple dollars or something. And so sometimes you got stuff that wasn't completely beautiful and fashionable, but that you could take home and decorate. So that's where the like stenciling a white shirt or a plain shirt would come in as an act of rebellion, but also of creative expression, where like taking a dress that maybe was like, you know, sort of just not attractive and ripping it up and taking a spray can to it and then gluing like little toy soldiers or little like beads or whatever you had. You know, I've seen pictures of myself with not only spray painted clothes, but with like, you know, like a water stopper for a necklace, you know. So it was about looking at things differently too. You might look at something for the shape it has, you know, instead of like, what is this? This is a, you know, this is a fly swatter. Well, I think it should be a necklace, you know, whatever. So I think it opened up the way we looked at the world, and it taught us not to try and fit our oddly shaped selves into predetermined square and round holes, if that makes any sense.
I just wanted to address one of the questions. We have some questions in the Q&A that relate to what you were just talking about. It says, this might be a little random, but how did being in the punk scene mix in with the popular Chola culture at the time? And how did that influence you?
I don't think that being in a punk band really influenced, or I don't think those two cultures really mixed, at least not in my experience, because I don't identify as a Chola. I grew up in East LA, and I had friends who were Cholas, and I spent a lot of time around Cholas, and I had certain respect and admiration for Cholas because I in my book, I talk about like working in the vice principal's office and making friends with Cholas who would come in and tell me about what they were doing. And I just remember thinking they were so cool that they had like such a sense of loyalty to each other, such a sense of community, and such a unique style that was never compromising at all. Cholas, the Chola beauty and Chola aesthetic is defined by Cholas themselves, not by some outside person that's going to sell them stuff, right? They don't buy into like the insecurity creating machine. And punk was the same way. So I feel like there were parallels rather than scenes influencing each other. I feel like there was, both things were rebelling against external pressures.
Should we go on to the next question, Richard?
Yes, do you have another question for me?
Yeah, so there's a quick follow-up to that. If you could talk a little bit more about the parallels, but also there's a question that says, can you talk about intersectionality of being Chicana, woman, and bisexual in punk?
I mean, I feel like all those things, like I don't even think of it as, I don't think of it as intersectional. I just think of it as like, that's how it was. I think a lot of times I'm asked questions in terms of like, you know, what was it like being like coming into a scene that was white and male, because there's an assumption that the punk scene was white and male. And that's not what it was. You know, my feeling is that it was the queers, the people of color and women who created the scene from the beginning. Like, we gave birth to it. There was nobody to let us in because it would not exist without us. So, and as such, I don't even understand the idea that, you know, that it would be intersectional with anything else. If that, and maybe I'm just missing and not misunderstanding the question, but I just feel like it was an inclusive scene, and it in fact, it's defined by our presence. There was no other scene that at that time. Later on, there were, as punk grew and spread out into the suburbs in like the late 70s and early 80s, then it started to take on different flavors. And depending on what community you were in, it was expressed differently. In some communities, it did become very white, very male. And as pogo dancing switched over to slam dancing, it became very like jock oriented. And in fact, that feeling of like being dominated by like jocks who would, you know, circle around and pound their chests and beat it into each other, replaced the female presence in the pit, right? And I think that was very destructive. And I think that, but in the end, I feel like that's the reason that Riot Grrrl was born. You know, I feel like that negation of the feminine side of punk and the POC and the queer side of punk, as that got pulled and narrowed the definition, it created a need for people to push back. And that's what I saw as positive side, was the pushback and bringing it back to its original state, which is a natural state, which is a state that's inclusive, and it is about ownership of your world, and it's about being represented or feeling represented, feeling heard. I don't know, Mary, did that answer the question?
Yeah, yes.
Alicia, one of the things that that should do, that is such a contribution to punk as a movement, is to challenge that misconception, right, of the early days of punk. And one of the ways you do that is not only by sort of challenging the narrative itself when you speak, but also by documenting and creating an archive of and identifying the women who were there at the time, right? Women who, musicians and participants that when folks came around to writing about the scene, were left out of those narratives.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that work?
Yeah, I think, you know, I had, I don't think I really understood erasure until I started looking at the punk books that were coming out in like even mid 80s. You know, I started seeing punk books come out, and they would talk all about the bands that were dominated by guys. And it's because I'm like, that's not what I remember. And even like I remember being interviewed for a book that's a friend was putting out. And he asked me, he's like, well, I want your opinion, but I want your opinion about these bands and these people. And they were all dudes. Right? So it's like, wow. So it's not like, but enough about me. What do you think about me? Right? It was that sort of situation where even though they wanted to say they had included women, they had actually included women to talk about the guys, not to talk about their own experiences. So, so I felt that I could see women being erased. So I wanted to give women a chance. And this is something that, you know, like we're talking about transitioning into like blogging and creating primitive websites. And luckily my husband helped, well, my husband did the website. I would just like do the interviews and generate the content, but he actually did the technical stuff and put it together. So my husband, Yes, he's a feminist. He's like, I think sometimes it's important to also mention that we build relationships that support feminism, and that they're not always going to be just with women, that there's a lot of men who I consider like really powerful feminists. Anyway, I got off track, which I do all the time. So feel free to lead me back to whatever you were you wanted me to talk about. I can't hear you. You're muted. Richard, you're muted.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention that because I do think that that's it's such a contribution, right? And one of the things that's just amazes me about sort of your trajectory and you having done that is you have a lot of young folks who are learning about these folks because of the work you did, right? And so that's why it's fun to see that that there are zines being put out there by young people that tell the history of women punk, and they're not only borrowing from the work you're doing, but then they feature you, right? And so you become that way. You become sort of iconic, right? Both in your own right as an artist, but also in the work you've done to ensure that these narratives don't disappear, right? And that there's the historical record you've made room within that historical record for these women. I think that's amazing.
That's what it means to be a community, right? Like to make sure that not only that you're heard, but that the other people in the community are also heard. And there's other women out there that are doing the same work that I've done, and I say that I've done because I'm not really working on the Women in Punk interviews as much as I did a few years ago. I'm actually working with a group called Turn It Up right now, which is a group that started because we were all asked to contribute to a book called Women in Rock, which was curated by Evelyn McDonald, who is professor at LMU. And we were all asked to write about, women in rock who had some kind of meaning for us. I wrote about June Millington from Fanny. And we got together at KPFK to promote the book once it came out. And when we were sitting in the little holding area, having coffee, and everybody brought food to share, of course, we started talking about like our experiences as women who were involved in rock, either as writers or DJs or musicians. And we all had stories of stories that needed addressing, stories that needed telling. And we felt such a kinship that we decided we wanted to take it beyond the writing of this book. We wanted to form a group to amplify the voices of women who were making music. So we called the group Turn It Up, and because it's about amplifying voices of women. And that's something that I'm very excited about. We've sort of taken a little bit of a break because what we were trying to do before 2020 hit was we were organizing mixers, organizing concerts, and trying to support other musicians. We did a little bit of like Facebook Live, Instagram Live interviews and doing things. And we have a website too, and we're on Instagram and Facebook as Turn It Up. So we're trying to build community, I guess. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build community, and our goal is to amplify the voices of women in music.
So we have a couple more questions in here. One of them, it follows a little bit deeper the way you had articulated, the way you experienced what people call intersectionality, right? So but then there's a sort of more lighthearted one. I'll ask you that one first, and you can answer them in whatever order you want.
Okay.
So the first question, the more lighthearted one is, what is your favorite song that you've ever performed and why? Okay, so let's do that one first, and then we'll go to the next one.
Oh, my favorite song that I've ever performed. Wow.
Very specific way of asking that question.
it's really, that's so hard because I mean, honestly, I don't think I have a favorite song that I've performed. I love, like, my songs are like my children, you know, and a lot of times when I write a new song, that's my favorite at the moment because it's just like, oh, it just came out and I feel like whatever I was feeling when I was writing it, it's really, you know, it's at the forefront of my thoughts or of my feelings, right? So I feel like that's the message I want to get out and that's the one I'm most passionate about. But I think I have a song called No Means No, which is about date rape. And whenever I perform it, I feel a really strong connection with people in the audience who's, you know, who sing with me. And I almost always have people come up to me and tell me what it has meant for them to share that song with me. And so that's very powerful. That's when I feel the power of music to heal people. And so that's a really pleasurable experience for me.
That's great. That's great. So this one's returning back to a theme. So from one of our students, did the punk scene foster what you were talking about as a kind of queer kinship? Was there an element of queerness that mattered, or were your identities not important when you entered a punk environment?
I think there was queerness, and it was out, and there were also people that were discovering their sexuality, who were not out, who were just maybe figuring out what they were. So they were not, some people were out and everybody knew they were queer and everybody was cool with it. And other people were not out. In the bags, there are 3 queer members, like it's 3 people who actually identified as queer, which is my guitarist. Later on, we have 2 guitarists. Another guitarist, Rob Ritter, who would become bass player after a while, was also queer, and I consider myself bisexual and also queer. So, but one of my guitarists was for a while not really committed to his sexuality, was kind of in the, I mean, you got to understand that we were young and trying to figure out, like, are we gay, are we straight, are we bi, are we something else? So, but I think what I felt was that any of it was acceptable. Any of it was not acceptable, but any of it was, nobody was being judged on the basis of who they loved or how they identified in the punk scene. So there were no disparaging remarks about, you know, queerness. It was all just part of who you were. Does that answer?
Yeah, I think that answers the question. That's great. If I've got a follow-up, sort of a different follow-up, a closer, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. So you said I was very, very young when punk was sort of getting towards the end of its life cycle. You know, when you were saying that it had been shifted to the kind of the suburbs and the jocks took over, and I got, you know, but what I remember most about it was the do-it-yourself approach of the whole thing, the clothes, the playing and all that. But the thing that I find most interesting talking to students who were, you know, in our department helping become activists, young activists, is their sense that they need to be professionals and have everything worked out and have all these, like, you know, really complex skills. And one of the things you were saying, which really resonated with me, was, you know, you just do with what you have and, you know, make it as you go. And I know you've been an activist for, you know, your life. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that, or how you talk to young people when you talk to them about politics and feeling excluded.
About politics and feeling excluded.
Activism of various kinds, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like activism of various kinds, I feel like that is very easy because that starts at home. That starts like, my mom, I remember, would sometimes say things that were offensive to me. And I had to like sit her down and say, Mom, you can't say that. I know it's a different generation. I know you were brought up to believe this or that. But I would call her out and say, and calling out your parents, that's part of growing up, right? But then you gotta do that to your friends. You gotta do that to your coworkers. You gotta do that to your boss. You gotta be able to, but the way we do that, the way that we make change can be very personal. You don't have to join a political group. You don't have to donate tons of money or like spend, like I personally, during the marches this past summer, I did not go out to march. I supported the marchers in different ways. I tried to raise money. I tried to disseminate information, and I worked in other ways that fit my lifestyle. I am health compromised, and I didn't want to take any chances with my health because I want to be around to keep fighting. So I feel like different people contribute differently. Not everyone is going to, pick up a guitar and write a song about the change that's needed. Not everyone is going to be a professor and educate the future, the children that are going to go out and like change the world. People can change little things in themselves and in their sphere of influences, which is like your family, coworkers, friends. Speak out to them. I'm sure, like I know that I have people in my family, and I have friends who have voted in ways that are very conservative, and I respect people who don't agree with me. I don't talk down to people, and I don't insult them. If they treat me with respect, I will come at them with respect. On the other hand, I don't like to engage in and things that are unproductive. I don't have time for people to to blast me with QAnon theories. So I don't have time for that. That's not serious dialogue. So I think it's important to differentiate between having dialogue and being online trading, like quips with people that you don't know. They might be people, they might be bots. So in that sense, I feel like we all have influence. As far as like people who feel disenfranchised and maybe are thinking that they don't want to vote because there's not a candidate that they can truly believe in, I have to say that there is not a candidate that you can truly believe in. All the candidates are people. They're all going to face intense pressures, and they're all going to have to make compromises at times. There's nobody that we don't vote for king or queen. Nobody can go out there and just say like, I'm going to do whatever I want because this is my platform. That's not how government works. So our choice is to remain involved, like to choose an option of the options that are presented to us, and to remain involved in the process by continuing to vote, by continuing to volunteer, by continuing to do the work to make lasting change.
Wow.
Alicia, you're going to be teaching for the Department of Critical Theory and Social Justice.
I am. I'm so excited about that.
As a Mellon Fellow, do you want to say just some quick words about that before we go?
Yes. Take my class. It's going to be really fun. It's going to be exciting. I'm going to be talking about how music can be a tool for social change. The class is called Access to Praxis, and I'm going to let you guess as to how we spelled access, because I think a lot of different ways of access work. Like access, like is that a guitar? Maybe. Access, is that with ACC, like who has access to praxis? Or access, is it's like a pivotal point where like music draws us into like a community and makes us create change? I don't know which axis it is, but it is a class I'm teaching. If you like listening to music, if you like thinking about the lyrics, thinking about the situations in which those songs were written and the impact they had on the listeners and on our history, then please sign up for my class. I think we're gonna have fun and we're gonna punk rock it because never taught a class on Zoom. So join me.
Well, I'm looking forward to that class. I wish I could take it myself. You can find this, if you'd like to watch it again, you'll be able to find it on the CTSJ website. Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Alicia, for joining us and for joining our faculty. I'm so excited to work with you next semester. And thank you for coming today.
Gracias, Alicia.
Bye.
Nos vemos.
Bye, everyone.